Oh, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Truckers Podcast, FYI. I'm your host, Doug from Ontario, Canada. 8:30 a.m. here on the 24th of August. Good morning after everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for wherever you are listening to the show. Thanks for joining me. It's going to be a really nice day today. Summertime temperatures returning back to this weekend. So get out there and enjoy the day and that. So, I was able to get out this past Thursday, come out here and do a show. And here I am Saturday morning. It's good to be back doing the podcast. So, hope everybody had a good week. I had an extremely busy week. First week back after a 2-week vacation. Next weekend, can't even believe that I'm saying this, is Labor Day weekend. And schools returning back, colleges, universities, heading back to class. People out there hustling, bustling, trying to get all their back to school shopping done. So what we have here and across here in Canada and all around the world is a homeless crisis. It's not an epidemic. It's not an epidemic. It is a crisis. Homeless statistics around the world. What it means to be homeless is different for everyone, and it depends on where you are in the world. It can be defined as living in a shelter or a place fit not for human habitat, or being in a transitional phase of housing. Could be in a shelter, couch surfing. The internal displacement of conflict or natural disasters may not be taken into account. Across the globe, the UN Habitat estimates that there is as many as 1.6 billion people, or more than 1 in 5, live in inadequate, crowded, and unsafe housing. London, England, for example, has experienced an appalling surge in homelessness because of restrictive urban housing markets. And in fact, the United Kingdom has one of the highest populations experiencing homelessness. According to the data from 2023, with 16 people in every 100,000 people living on the streets and 410 per 100,000 living in temporary accommodations or shelters. There are more than 300,000 people in the United Kingdom, half of them children, are thought to be sleeping on friends' sofas or in cars or other forms of temporary accommodations. It is estimated that around 14 million people in the United Kingdom live in relative poverty, and the number of people relying on food banks has surged from 25,000 in 2009 to more than 3 million people in 2024. In the United States, The number of people living in the streets is 76 per 100,000, with 117 per 100,000 staying in temporary housing. Of the 500,000 people experiencing homelessness in the United States in 2022, around 1 in 5 lived in either Los Angeles, New York, with half of all unsheltered people living in California, according to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Developments. So in the United States, cities with the most homeless people, with the largest number of people experiencing homelessness, Los Angeles, 65,000. New York City, 61,000. Seattle, a little over 13,000. San Jose, 10,000. Oakland, just over 9,000. Sacramento, just over 9,000. Phoenix, this includes Mesa, Maricopa County, over 9,000. San Diego City and County, just over 8,000. San Francisco, just over 7,000. Metropolitan Denver, just over 6,000. What are the causes of homelessness and what are the impacts? So the United Kingdom's homeless charity crisis lists some of the many reasons people are forced into homelessness, which vary from poverty and a lack of affordable housing to losing a job, mental or physical health problems, and often, in this case of women, violent or abusive relationships. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, the cost of living crisis sparked by high inflation has made it even more difficult for people to buy homes in the United Kingdom while the cost of renting is rising. Well, that goes without saying. Same thing here is happening in Canada. Same thing here is happening in the United States. With high inflation, it costs more to rent and it costs more to buy a home. It costs more to feed your family. It costs more to clothe your family. And it goes without saying, being homeless can make it harder to hold down a job and exacerbates existing mental and physical health conditions. And in fact, people experiencing homelessness are more than twice as likely as the general population to report a physical health condition. 78% versus 30%, while almost half, 40%, have mental health diagnosis compared to less than a quarter among the general population. And just because people who have a physical or mental health issues does not make them dangerous, does not make them violent. And the rates of drug and alcohol use are 4 times higher among people experiencing homelessness than in the general population. And 2/5 report using substances to cope with mental health problems. So what do we need to do to address it around the world? Finland has become the poster country for efforts to address homelessness. With its first housing initiative, we're starting a first housing initiative here across Canada, right here in Ontario. First housing initiatives using wraparound supports. And for those who need the wraparound supports 24/7. So their first housing policy in Finland is a human rights strategy guided by a set of core principles. And it involves collaboration between the state, cities, and local. Using the human rights strategy guided by a set of core principles. The human rights strategy. So the human right to housing. Transform short-term shelters into affordable housing with efforts driven by a shared goal to end homelessness. So housing first priorities, permanent housing is a first step to address homelessness. Giving apartment to those who might not qualify for shelter in some cities or countries. So for public space and residents have a team of therapists, doctors, social workers, and even a first of its kind empathy consultant providing care and support around the clock. You know, the Housing First model was originated by a Canadian clinical psychologist who advocated providing housing, on-site support for people with a history of mental illness and substance abuse as a way to end homelessness. And this is what we're doing here in Ontario. And with the housing that they have, recently built, and there are new locations around the city where I reside, which are providing this sort of care to keep people housed. Canadian psychologist, says what's frustrating about homelessness is you can solve it right away. It's not like we don't need to develop a cure. There is so much evidence showing how housing first works, but it takes political will. So it takes political will from the federal government, provincial government, and the municipality government. Solving the affordable housing crisis is another really big issue. Best way to tackle homelessness is to stop it happening in the first place. And by ensuring those vulnerable to homeless, such as people leaving prison or care, have a home. People leaving the hospitals having a home. Here in the province of Ontario, Doug's for an initiative to build 1.5 million homes over a 10-year period. Affordable housing, he says. Affordable housing. Affordable for who? Placing people out of hospitals into nursing homes isn't part of building $1.5 million, 5 million homes over 10 years. See, Doug Ford adds that in there. So now he is almost, he's saying that, oh, we don't need to build as many homes now. Access to adequate housing and basic services is fundamental to affordable and accessible cities. And that starts with formalizing informal housing for 1 in 8 people who live in slums worldwide. 3 steps for government to alleviate a housing crisis. prioritizing land tenure security, strengthening climate resilient housing, expanding finance for housing. It is a complex problem with diverse root cause that must be tackled through multiple dimensional programs. What else is causing homelessness? Around the world? Violence in the home. How does it happen? Inequalities and pathways of homelessness. The lack of stable housing can result in disparities between groups of people. Some are less likely to have faced homelessness than others. Financial challenges are a leading cause of homelessness. People who are low wage jobs, people who are on welfare, people who are on a disability. Not just being able to put food on the table. Victims of abuse may have nowhere to go. Here across Canada, here in Ontario, victims of abuse, violence in the home is an epidemic. Family violence. Now, family violence in Canada rose for the fifth consecutive year in 2021. And here we are in 2024, with women and girls accounting for 2/3 of the victims. Relationship issues was the second leading factor driving Canadians into homelessness. As a related driver was fleeing abuse, or a common pathway into homelessness for many, but 4 times more likely for women than for men. And when we look at the absolute homelessness exclusively, these figures double. With just over 2 in 5 women, 40% report of absolute homelessness at some point as a result of fleeing abuse. Health issues can interrupt housing stability. While financial and relationship issues are the most common causes of homelessness, health-related issues can lead to homelessness episodes. And Canadians who experience any form of homelessness are more likely to report very poor mental health at 38% versus 17% in the overall population. More respondents listed health issues as a major factor contributing to absolute homelessness at 16% than to hidden homelessness at 8%. And Canadians experience homelessness or underlying mental health conditions have also been highly represented in recent um, opioid hospitalizations. And moving doesn't always lead to finding a home. Canadians move for a variety of reasons, including changing household size, employment, better housing or neighborhoods, and evictions, leading to many diverse experiences of hidden homelessness. Another notable driver of hidden homelessness are relocations and waiting to move into a new home. Over 1 in 3 households recording at some point in the past reported waiting over 6 months in a state of hidden homelessness. Becoming housed may not be the end of housing need. Households experienced homelessness in the past were more likely to be living in dwellings in need of major repairs or in core housing need. No matter how someone becomes homeless housing or lack thereof, which we are experiencing, have been shown to have a significant effect on one's future, for better or for worse. Does everybody have a role? Meaning that, does everybody have a role in to help ending homelessness? Only if you want to participate, have your input, go to town meetings, get involved in the community, getting involved with the agencies, getting involved with the municipality governments, getting involved with the provincial government, getting involved with the federal government. Yeah, then we have a responsibility. If we don't want to help take on the initiative, then stop complaining about the homelessness. You don't have to go very far. There isn't just one area of the city or town where homeless people gather. They are scattered all over the city in tent encampments, sleeping rough on park benches, sleeping rough in the tent encampments with little to no shelter. In parks and pathways, along the riverbanks, under overpasses, everywhere. You see them pushing or carrying just the belongings they have. Shelters are underfunded. Shelters are over capacity. They're living and sleeping and doing what they do in all types of weather elements. whether it's summer, fall, winter, spring. And it just isn't people who have an opiate addiction or a mental health issue who are homeless. Military personnel experiencing homelessness. Women and children experience homelessness. Fleeing abuse from the home. Going to women's shelters. So what you see on the street for people who have a opiate addiction and a mental health problem, you don't see the hidden homeless. What you see on the streets and what you see in some of our parks and on our pathways along the riverbanks, tent encampments. And it doesn't always mean that every single person out there who are living rough like that having an addiction. And the root causes of becoming homelessness is one is a loss of employment. Well, I think what some people don't understand is that um, you're living, you're away from one paycheck of becoming homeless. And I mean, if you're employed and you're not banking anything, you suffer a life altering injury, unable to work. Therefore, your disability is not going to pay enough for your mortgage. Your disability is not going to pay enough for your apartment. And if the other member in the household isn't making enough money to support the entire family, to support the overall cost of living, you're going to end up on the streets. A loss of a job. If you're just making above minimum wage, I mean, if you're making $18 an hour, you lose your job because you're already living paycheck to paycheck. Employment insurance takes a while to come in, take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer. You miss your rent payment. Doesn't mean you're going to be evicted right away, but you can't continue to miss your rent payment because then you're going to get served notice. And if you can't come up with the means to come up with the back rent, you're going to end up on the streets. It's a worldwide crisis, homelessness. And when it comes to family violence, it is now an epidemic. here across Canada. Housing is a first initiative to get people housed. So the lack of stable housing can result in disparity between groups of people, with some are less likely to have faced homelessness than others. Indigenous households, 29%, were almost 3 times as likely to have experienced some form of homelessness when compared to the total population, while racialized at 9% and immigrant at 8% households were below the national average. Similarly, recent point in time counts of homeless shelters nationwide have found that 35% of respondents identify as Indigenous. What drives people into homelessness in Canada, and why we have so many Canadians found themselves without a home? Financial challenges are the leading cause of homelessness. Victims of abuse have nowhere to go. Health issues can interrupt housing stability. Moving doesn't always lead to finding a home. Becoming housed may not be the end of a housing need. These are the issues that we have to address. The government has to address. We can't build housing fast enough to end homelessness. The supports that people need, whether they're a victim of abuse, mental illness, addiction, have wraparound supports for people with mental illness and addiction to keep them housed. Cities like, I mentioned this on Thursday too, cities like Hamilton and other cities now, including London, where I reside. Hamilton, with their initiative response to rental evictions, putting in place a bylaw so whatever landlord you are, if you are looking to use the rental eviction to get your tenants out to double or triple your rent, and not taking into account that the tenant who resides in that unit or home has the right to first refusal, and the landlord's abusing that, not telling the tenant when the renovations are done and re-rent it out for double or triple the amount of rent. So Hamilton's initiative with this bylaw is that any landlord, if you plan on a rental eviction, then you have to apply to the city for renovations permit, which is going to cost you $400. An inspector will then come into the residence and see whether or not the tenant has to move out or not. If the tenant doesn't have to move out for the, you know, because you're just, you know, painting the walls, cleaning up the place, putting in new appliances, tenant doesn't have to move out. Even if you're putting in laminate floors or hardwood floors, tenant doesn't have to move out. I mean, if anybody has done any home renovations in your own home and you're doing, do it yourself, did you have to move out? No. And if you hired somebody to come in to do your flooring for you, do you have to move out of your home? No. So what happens is that after all the renovations are done, the inspector comes back in because they have to have a timeline. And the landlords can't dick around with that. You'll be given an amount of time to have the renovations done. And the tenant can move back in if the tenant chooses to move back in because they have the first right of refusal. And then they move back in at the same rent that they were paying, not double or triple. So here in the city where I reside, London, they're taking on that initiative as well. But they're not going to make it retroactive, neither. Because there's, you know, um, cases already with the Landlords Tenants Board over these rental evictions. It's not as, landlords doesn't think it is as simple as just because you get served an N13 form for a rental eviction, you do not have to move out. You can challenge that in the Landlords Tenants Board. That is your right as a tenant. It even gives you a timeline. Oh, you have to be out by, the end of October. No, I don't. Because I'm going to file against that landlord, and it's going to take a while before it even gets heard. It's not, people out there, it's really unfortunate. There are some people out there, even as tenants, they don't understand their rights. They get this N13 form, and now they're in panic mode because they're being evicted for rental evictions, and they think that they have to leave. When in fact you don't. And while things are being tied up at the Landlords Tenants Board, some landlords out there can be a dick and make it difficult for you while you're waiting to be heard, but that's going to end up on the, you know, against the landlord. You don't have to, if you get an eviction notice for that, say, oh, I have to do the roof. You don't have to move out. I'll have to do some foundation work. I don't have to move out. What is the extensive of the home renovation or apartment renovation that you have to do that the tenant has to move out. I mean, if you're putting in new sliding doors on the balcony, tenant doesn't have to move out. If you're putting new windows in the apartment, tenants don't have to move out. If you're painting the walls, tenants don't have to move out. So what type of extensive renovations do you have to do? Are you tearing down half the place? It's ridiculous of how many cases are out there for rental evictions. Just last year, apartment complex not far from where I reside, the buildings were sold. Now these buildings were built before. I think they were built before 2018. I think they were built in the 80s. They were sold last year to this place called Webster Inc. in the Webster Apartments on Webster Street. They serve the tenants with rental evictions. Everybody's got to move out. Get out. Got to get out. Acorn is a group that uh, works and helps you through the process of evictions and rental evictions. They staged a protest. The tenants staged a protest. And these new employees of Webster Inc., they're at the property intimidating and harassing, yelling at the tenants, you have to move out now. It's just ridiculous. There are landlords out there that are offering people money just to move out. Just to move out. But here's the problem. Here's the problem with that. First of all, they're either living on a disability or they have a low paying job. And $700 a month is all they can afford for rent. Come up with first and last month's rent for another place. So $700 apartment, you potentially looking at $1,600. You have to come up with first and last, so that's $3,200. And even so, you're on a minimum wage job or above a minimum wage job, and you're going to pay $1,600 a month from $700 a month just because they gave you $5,000? How does that work? They'd be homeless in a few months. I mean, hidden homelessness isn't even counted because they have no idea. Now, like I said before, governments, you know, are responsible for housing. From the federal government down to the provincial government down to the municipality. We have waiting lists for city housing, 10-year waiting list. They haven't built social housing since the 80s. So it's not surprising that there's a 10-year waiting list. So if you have to flee your home, whether it be the emergency shelter, or you've been evicted, or you're a newcomer, or you're coming from a war-torn country, it's going to be really difficult to find housing. And never mind the cost of living of everything else. Not just your rent, to buy groceries, food banks. When a food bank, we like go back to the 80s. We had a recession in the 80s, and food bank start to pop up. It's supposed to be a temporary thing, just temporary, to help people over the hump. Here we are 30 years later plus, and the food banks are still here. And more people are using the food banks. So they can hopefully still pay their rent. But I also think, we leave everything, let's just leave it up to the government to fix it. I think that we have an input here as well, and we should have an input here as well to help come up with suggestions on helping to end homelessness. Pushing the government even harder to stop sitting on their hands and do more. And wealthy nations like Canada, the United States, and countries across Europe, the United Kingdom. How is this even happening? Population growth, somewhat of it. It's not like we have a shortage of land to build on. But then what is going to be affordability? Even when it comes to rentals, you build, big corporations build a high rise. City approves the deal and says, hey, look, you know, 10 of those units have to be below market. Well, they may come to a conclusion and say, settle on 5 apartments have to be below market. So the rent's going to be $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment. Okay, so we'll make it a 1-bedroom $1,800. That's below market. How's that affordable? As long as it's less than what that apartment is, that's below market. That doesn't work. That doesn't work for a lot of people. And even if they want to build rows of townhomes for rent at the market rate, how many of them are going to be below market rate and how much? They're going to charge you $2,400 a month for a 3-bedroom townhouse. Oh, so just make it $2,200 for others. That's below market rent. How is that affordable? The unfortunate thing here is that do you think that we're actually going to see affordable housing talking affordable housing, affordable rent at $750 to $800 a month? You ever think you're going to see that again? Probably not. And if we can't start building homes for people to afford to live in and even afford to buy, if we can't start building homes at $150 to $200 a square foot, we're not going to solve this housing crisis. They're building homes for $600 a square foot and up. Anywhere from $800,000 for a home to $1 million. In Vancouver, out in British Columbia, Vancouver, you have to be making $250,000 a year to be able to afford to buy a place. City of Toronto, something around $180,000 a year in order to be able in order to find to buy a place. Nobody is moving. Nobody is jumping off the sofa to go buy a house. Anybody making $60,000 a year? That was good money in the 70s and 80s. $60,000 a year is not going to get you a house. So if we can't start building houses for $320,000 or less, the housing crisis is going to remain. Can they actually do this? Can they actually build homes starting at $150 a square foot, $200 a square foot? That's just a wait and see. Interest rates at the banks needs to come down. Dramatically. But the government, they have to be they have to be behind the initiative. I mean, Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, he spent $1 billion of our money. I can't make that amount up by putting ready to drink alcohol beverages in your corner convenience stores because he thinks that's the priority for Ontarians. That's the number one priority for Ontarians, that we have access to alcohol, not just from the beer stores and the liquor control board. No, right at the convenience store. This is what Ontarians want. The fuck we do. It's ridiculous. I mean, if he thinks that's Ontarians' number one priority, the man needs to leave office. What we want is what everybody else wants, and that's affordability. And we want housing, and we want affordable housing, and we want it now. That's what we want. We have so many different agencies out there that are helping and supporting low-income families and homelessness. And first housing model and wraparound supports for people who need it when they are housed, so that they don't become homeless again. These are the initiatives that we are taking on here in the city that I reside in. We could care less about ready to drink alcohol beverages in our convenience stores or our grocery stores. But Doug Ford was bound and bent to get it done. He thinks selling off portions of our healthcare to the private sector is what Ontarians want. I think he's becoming just as light-minded as Donald Trump. They want to stop these safe injection sites for drug users. They want to close them down, 10 to be exact. Because they don't think harm reduction is working. They want to close, so approximately 10 of them, they want to close them by next March. So, and then have other, so there'll be no safe drug and safe drug injection sites. There'll be no more needle exchange programs. So what are they going to do when next March comes along? Are they going to have a plan in place leading up to next March, or are they just going to shut them down and then figure out where they're going to what type of facilities are they going to have? And the drug overdoses continue to rise. This is another plan of Doug Ford. Because if they're going to be a rehabilitation centers, drug addiction help, you can't force people into rehab. You can't forcefully remove them from the streets and hold them against their will. There are people who want help. There are people who do not want help. The leader of the Conservative Party at the federal level, Pierre Poilievre, he talks about the safe drug supply. He says it's no good, it's not working. We need addiction treatment. Yes, we do. But we can't force people into treatment. And he was asked by a reporter, well, if we don't have these services and you're thinking addiction treatment, which is all in good intent, he was asked, then would you be able to force them into treatment? And his answer was, well, I don't know. I'd have to look into that. Well, the answer is no, you cannot forcefully remove people from the streets and put them into treatment. That's the answer. Not, no, I have to look into that. I don't know. I have to look into that. I mean, he's the leader of a federal party. He's a leader who's running for prime minister's office, and he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that you can't forcibly put people into treatment. No, I have to look into it. I'm not sure about that. That's ridiculous. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave it at that. It's going to be a beautiful weekend. It's going to be a beautiful day out today. Sunny blue skies. Nice and warm. Get out there, enjoy it. Get out there, enjoy your weekend. I'll be doing the same. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you can join me, great. If you can't, I understand. So until then, take care and be safe. This is the Truckers Podcast, FYI. I'm your host, Doug. Thanks for listening.